Toby, you bring some incredibly sad news from the world of football.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm afraid to tell you that Kevin Keegan, the former England player and manager, has died. We have a statement on behalf of Kevin's family. It says, "It is with immense sadness that we announce that Kevin Keegan has passed away at the age of 75. Kevin had been battling cancer and was surrounded by his wife and daughters in his final moments. A double Ballon d'Or winner, Kevin was a much-loved husband, father and grandfather. The family would like to thank Kevin's incredible medical team for all their support. This is a hugely difficult time and they are requesting space and privacy." So one of England's all-time greatest footballers, Kevin Keegan, has died at the age of 75, guys.
Yeah, wow, that's
great
incredibly sad.
Absolutely a great manager, good pundit, a brilliant football man. And there is a wonderful documentary of his time in Germany. I don't know if it's available now, but I remember watching it at the time, and it's so brilliant. Never mind all the players he was a real trailblazer for them.
And he was one of those players that sort of transcended. Not only was a brilliant player and European Footballer of the Year, but he became a bit of a cultural icon. Did the Brute adverts, brought out singles head over heels, and had a life and an existence beyond football, was bigger than football.
And he's certainly, a European icon, isn't he? Well beyond these shores. I mean, in Germany, you mentioned, his time at Hamburg. He's absolutely legendary. As I mentioned, 2-time Ballon d'Or winner. And you think those of us old enough to have watched that Newcastle side that competed with Manchester United, and of course, the famous quote, "I would love it if we beat them." He was a man that loved joyous football, didn't he?
He was passionate.
He was, and he was, to the point where he called it a day after that Germany performance for England and spoke to Claire Tomlinson and said, "That's it, I'm gone. I can't," just could be quite headstrong, but was a very passionate guy and would make those kind of decisions. But as a footballer, what a player he was. He was sensational.
Great
we were able to watch him for really the whole of his career, certainly from his time at Liverpool, when he was just sensational. That is really sad. He did a podcast that Josh Whittaker and the guys did, Quickly Kevin, Will He Score? That famous line that Brian Moore put to him as David Batty took that penalty. They did a podcast, and in the final one they did, this is the last time we saw Kevin, was back in May 2024, and they did a show at the Palladium, and Kevin was the guest, and he was on great form. He was really, really good that night. It was very funny and self-deprecating and kind of taking the mickey out of himself. But that is so sad. That is really sad to hear.
It was brilliant in Superstars, and that famous moment when he comes off the bike.
I mean, as I said, there's just so many little cultural touchstones you think about with Kevin Keegan, well beyond him playing football. So
there won't be many non-dry eyes, as it were.
I suppose the Liverpool fans will be. That sounds so sad. Thank you, Toby. Well, look, we'll bring your reaction to that in the next half hour, but that's the sad news we bring you. Kevin Keegan has died, age 75. It's Paul Hawksbee and Andy Jacobs here on talkSPORT. I think we're all still reeling from the news that Kevin Keegan has died. We obviously knew that he wasn't well, and he said recently that his illness was very bad, and he feared the worst. But it was always still a shock when you hear news like that from such a wonderful player and such a sort of icon of not just sort of British sport, but British life, as we said.
Absolutely.
He just had an impact on so many different things. Kessie, the Newcastle fan said that Kevin was my hero growing up, obviously as player and manager. Everybody really sad to hear the news today. What has happened?
Lots of footage on Sky Sports showing he was a brilliant player.
Yeah, just scoring so many fantastic goals as well, and making lots of fantastic goals. That relationship he had with John Toshak at Liverpool as a player. There was always that one goal I remember that he scored where I think it might have been a Ray Clements clearance. It was flicked on by Toshak and Keegan volleyed it in. Just a fantastic.
I don't remember. It sounds fairly typical.
Yeah, that always kind of lives with you. And then it's kind of rolling in the World Cup as well in '82 when he wasn't fit.
No,
but was so
desperate. He missed that chance in the header.
Just so desperate to play, but to be an icon of a couple of great clubs like Liverpool and Newcastle, that is incredible.
And great on TV, great pundit. No, absolutely. Yeah. Changing the subject, moving on slightly. This is a quote from the Argentine newspaper Clarín. This is the most unbelievable quote I've ever seen. As never before, the Argentine team displayed both on and off the field a range of values that are rare these days. From the pitch and beyond, they gave several lessons and showed the face of a country that we would like to see away from the football pitch. A team that was polite and respectful, despite a few unfortunate isolated incidents in the last match.
Wow.
That didn't speak ill of its rivals or try to justify its own mistakes by blaming others. Hello?
You mentioned Kevin Keegan as a pundit there, and I think he'd been working on TV after that game last night. I think it would have been pretty forthright.
Yeah.
Joining us now is a man who worked with Kevin for England as the head of communications, and we mentioned that moment backstage at Wembley, the last game at Wembley, when Didi Hamann scored that goal and we lost 1-0, and Kevin decided he didn't want to manage England anymore. Of course, he was front and centre of that. Adrian Bevington joins us. Hi, Adrian.
Hi, guys. Good afternoon.
Yeah. So you work with Kevin pretty up close and personal. As I said, we knew he wasn't well, but this just still comes as an awful shock, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Yeah, someone just sent me a message. Just obviously broke. I was really caught cold by it, to be honest with you. I wasn't expecting this today.
What are your memories of working with him? We said he was a very emotional guy. Was he absolutely loved his football? And he's kind of, if anybody was going to say, I can't take this team any further. I mean, what are your memories of that day when you discovered that Kevin decided he didn't want to be the England manager anymore?
Yeah, it was what you remember the day. It was a dark, dismal day, the last ever game at Wembley. The weather was horrendous, and the whole mood around the stadium was awful at the end of the game. We lost 1-0. Coming down the tunnel, I was sort of walking backwards towards the tunnel as Kevin was walking towards me, and Kevin was applauding the crowd, getting some stick. I think he acknowledged that in his interview himself, and it was quite a tense environment as he walked down the tunnel that day. He was in the dressing room for a while, and I got asked to go and call for various senior figures from within the FA board to bring them in and out of the dressing room, and eventually got called in myself. And by that time, Kevin had already, I think, updated the players that he couldn't take the team any further, which I think was his priority. You understand, Kevin was very players manager. He was football through and through, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And then I just got into the area where the baths are, and Kevin was still stood there, and I think it was Adam Crozier and David Davis broke the news to me that Kevin was not carrying on. And then I think he did one TV interview that was shared with everybody. He got into his car with his wife, and they headed off. And that was the end of Kevin's tenure with England. But I'd just like to say, working with Kevin, he was very much a heart and sleeve person. Cared dearly for every job that he ever did. I only worked with him with England, but his passion was undoubted. But like so many people who grew up, certainly my generation, he was such an iconic figure. And I think for young people these days, they don't appreciate just how big a star Kevin Keegan was. And for me, to work with Kevin Keegan, having watched him in Superstars when he was like, watched him for Liverpool. I remember when he came back to Southampton, my dad took me to see him play at Ayresome Park for Middlesbrough v Southampton, because it was Kevin Keegan. And then to work with him, I was genuinely in awe of the guy when I got to work with him, because he was such a big star.
We forget, as we touched on this earlier on, Adrian, he was a bit of a cultural icon. He had a life far beyond just being a footballer. He did the Sugar Puffs adverts, didn't he, for years. Brute 33, where Henry, Green Cross Code man he was. He did He was one of the very first. I mean, George Best was before my time as a player, so I can't really reference that. But in my mind, Kevin Keegan was the first kind of, marketed superstar footballer. And the fact he then went on to play in Germany with Hamburg as well kind of emphasised that. But I still think Kevin, for all his success at club football and then the magical Newcastle team he built, there was always a thread with England as well, because he was such an iconic England captain during that period when the team wasn't so great. He was a great pundit as well. For many years, did he work for ITV and did a lot of punditry, and again was forthright, and all of it came from the fact that he could pass comment on that because he was such a wonderful player, one of the top players in world football during his era.
Well, he was a great player, and I think, I watched the montage of him recently, and I think it might have been one of the European Cup games that he played for Hamburg, maybe the semi-final against Real Madrid, when they got to the final when they played Nottingham Forest, I think it was. And you realise, I mean, I think Kevin was magnanimous enough himself to say that, you know, it was his attitude and his work rate. He wasn't short on ability, let's be honest, but I think people always looked at his attitude, and he was an unbelievable player, and he accomplished everything he possibly could through his attitude and commitment to being a great player. And he was a wonderful team player as well as being a great individual. You know, and I think that has to be recognised in all the conversation that will follow on from this very sad news today, because we remember him as a manager of Newcastle United. We remember him as a manager of Manchester City in England, and a really excellent pundit too. But he was also a great player who led the nation for the best part of a decade.
Yeah, in some ways you're right, Adrian, that there may be some younger people out there now who don't know much about Kevin Keegan, and they'll be watching some goals, they'll be watching it on YouTube and TV, and they're thinking, wow, that might be their first opportunity to see just how great he was.
Guys, you remember the 77 European Cup final.
Yeah.
And I certainly, it was the first final I actually saw, a European Cup final, and, you know, not a Liverpool fan, but was cheering like crazy for Liverpool that night. And Keegan was absolutely sensational from memory that night. Like Bertie Vogts man-marked him from memory. Kevin got man of the match. I think he got it brought down for a penalty late in the game. And that was a genuine world-class iconic performance that obviously was his last game for Liverpool before he went off to Hamburg and won 2 European Players of the Year.
Had you run into him recent years? He did a bit on the after-dinner circuit. He kept busy. As I said, I saw him last year or a couple of years back at an event. So he was still very sparky and very funny and self-deprecating.
I've not seen Kevin for a good while, even though you know, as you say, he's been around the circuit. But I do remember him coming along at our request to an event that we did. It was back in the FA days at the end, but he moved on to a few different things, but he still turned up to an event we were doing for our 150th anniversary. He was very close with Trevor Brooking. I think they had a really great relationship. And yeah, whenever you saw Kevin, even just making public appearances, I have to say one thing about Kevin Keegan as well. It's important I get this across. I don't think I've ever encountered, you know, a big star football person be so good with the public. He was unbelievable with his time. He would sign an autograph, do a photograph with absolutely everybody. He made sure, whether you were in England or abroad, and I've been abroad in Belgium, places like that, on goodwill, he would do everything to make sure that people, children in particular, felt important.
The other thing that's just struck me, I'd forgotten about this, another great iconic moment of sort of English football history is when they sold Andy Cole to Manchester United, and he felt he should go outside because the fans were angry. Then he stood out there and explained why they'd done the deal, which is so unlike the world of sort of PR to the max football these days, isn't it, Adrian?
And working with Kevin Keegan, which, you know, as I say, for someone like myself, it was both daunting and incredibly exciting to be spending any time in his company and just listening to him speak. But yeah, that moment at St James's Park, you know, he wasn't a PR, insofar as you couldn't PR Kevin Keegan. He was a PR man naturally, if that makes sense.
Yes.
To his compliment, he was so good with people. That was his, you know, apart from his football qualities, that was undoubtedly his biggest skill set.
Yeah. Adrian, we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Adrian Bevington, then the former head of communications for the England team when Kevin Keegan was managing the team. If you're just joining us, that's incredibly sad news. Kevin Keegan has died age 75, and a lot of people have been getting in touch to pay tribute. The greatest signing Southampton ever made, says Mike, the Saints fan. 2 seasons, 37 goals. There's little things that you forget
about his
career.
Yeah.
Privileged to have him on our roster.
Mick Channon, a great relationship.
Yeah.
Gareth A. Davis, of course, contributes to talkSPORT and boxing and Telegraph boxing writer. He said, I interviewed KK for Telegraph. He was so humble. He was our Maradona. Very, very sad. He said, but he was a curly perm trendsetter. Which
yes,
is true,
he certainly was, wasn't he? Yeah. Ash, the Newcastle fan, said, my years growing up as a Newcastle fan with the entertainers team of Ginola, Albert, Ferdinand, Beardsley. Rest in peace, King Kev. Martine says, I got to meet Kevin at a convention, got a photo about 10 years ago. I asked him if he would take the Liverpool job. He said it was never offered to him. I said he should have taken it after Souness, and he quick-wittedly replied, It would have been easier, he said. So, Mateen, thanks very much for getting in touch. So you can keep your tributes to Kevin Keegan coming, talksport.com, text to 81089, tweet to TSH and J, 0371722 3344.
Thanks forward. Keegan's flick. Berardi. Keegan again. Chance here for Keegan. He's done it. Keegan scores, and St James's Park goes absolutely wild.
As a person, he was a winner. He was a winner in everything he did, and we've discussed that. But most of all, he had this passion. He had a passion and desire. And sometimes you can't give people that. He had this burning desire inside him to win. Not win at all costs, but win the right way. And I think he put a team on the pitch and he tried to win the right way. And he wasn't interested in defending. He wasn't interested in scoring from set players. He just wanted attractive attacking football with good players on the pitch. And I think the fans appreciated that. I certainly appreciated working with him.
That's John Carver, who was a coach under Kevin Keegan. I think he was a coach at the club when Kevin was there as a player the first time around, and worked with him at the club. And in light of what we witnessed last night, winning in the right way is kind of very much foremost in our minds, isn't it? Of course. If you just join us, the sad news that Kevin Keegan has died, aged 75. Steve Harmison is a huge Newcastle fan, as well as being a Ashes-winning cricketer. He joins us now. Hi, Harmy.
Afternoon, gent.
I mean, I'm sure you encountered Kevin along the way, didn't you?
Yeah, many times. I think the last time I seen him was either early on this year or at the end of last year. We were at the races and we worked together. Kevin was a lovely man. Listening to obviously what John said there, I was fortunate to do My Sporting Heroes or My Sporting Life on Sky, and I got asked by Gary Newborn, would you like to do it? And I was like, yes. Anybody from the entertainers team? And he said, Kevin will do it. And I was gobsmacked. Wow. And I mean, I asked Gary, where's the script? You won't need one. Just ask Kevin how he's going, what day he's having, and then just mention Newcastle United. And an hour and 50 minutes later, we had to get interrupted to say, you've done too much, you've finished. And
Incredible.
He was an amazing man, gave Newcastle a huge amount of belief. I'm sure Eddie Howe won't mind me saying this, that in times I've obviously working at the club and at the ground and interviewing the manager, he said, we've picked clips of what he said to you about this football club, about the people and what it means to the people of this football club and what it's like to play inside the stadium. And behind the scenes in Newcastle in the last few years under Eddie Howe has shown his players what Kevin Keegan's dream was for Newcastle, which was to play the right way, like what John was talking about, and to entertain the people of Newcastle. And so far, Sir Bobby Robson did it, Kevin Keegan did it, Eddie Howe, I think, has done it up to a point, and he's still to continue to do it. And I think them special people, and Kevin, not only did he give Newcastle fans belief once when he was a player, he gave a huge abundance when he was manager, and around the country at that time, them entertainers that Kevin was in charge of, they were everybody's second favourite team, largely down to the fact of Kevin.
Yeah,
they're a great side.
It was wonderful football, and it's the old phrase. Really, they were the kind of best team never to win the Premier League, really, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure Kevin would have loved to have won the Premier League, like we all would as Newcastle fans. But like he said many times, it was about the way his team went about playing the game, and as a person, he was infectious. Brought Alan Shearer to the club, brought a lot of players to the club because of Kevin Keegan. As we're finding now, Newcastle is not the most attractive football club to come and the city to live in. But I tell you what, during that time of entertainers, were flocking to Newcastle United because of, largely down to one man, and that was Kevin's charisma, his personality, the way he wanted his teams to play. And Newcastle might have come up short, but I tell you what a ride it was. Not only when Kevin was a player, bringing, mentoring the likes of Chris Waddle and Peter Beardsley before they went on to brilliance, but also, mentoring and in charge of some of the best players that's ever played at at St James's Park in a black and white shirt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And such a big player for 4 clubs in Newcastle, Liverpool, Hamburg and Southampton. So, all the fans have great memories of
such was his career that until one of the Saints fans just now was paying tribute, you forget just how influential he was in a couple of seasons at Southampton as well, Harmy.
Yeah, and if you look at where he, as Andy just mentioned, Liverpool, Hamburg, Newcastle and Southampton. When he left Hamburg, when he came back to England, when he went to Southampton weren't the sort of most fashionable club. Newcastle, when he came to Newcastle, weren't the most fashionable club. Kevin's seen a vision in what he wanted, and what the infection and the supporters that he wanted to play for, and he took them with him, and he did. And one sort of final sort of story I have with Kevin was that a few years ago now, there was the famous 4-3 Liverpool game from many, many years ago. There was a reenactment at Kingston Park, the rugby ground at Newcastle, and a lot of the players came back to play because Kevin was going to manage that team. And I remember after the game, I was fortunate to play 10 minutes in it as an also-ran that was sort of put on the field. But at the end of the game, there was people having to change former players having to change their flights, change their trains because they couldn't leave without saying goodbye to Kevin. And the reason why they had to wait was Kevin was signing autographs and he hadn't even gone to the change rooms. He was out there for like 2.5 hours. This man was a brilliant man in Newcastle. And as you can feel, I'm so well known. He's a fantastic human being as well.
Well, look, we appreciate you joining us to pay tribute when it's still so raw. Thank you, Harmy. Thanks very much.
Afternoon, boys.
Steve Harmison there, cricketer and Newcastle fan on Kevin Keegan. We are still coming to terms with it, really. It's only been...
That documentary that I mentioned, because I've looked it up now, it's an ITV documentary. It's called Brian Moore Meets Kevin Keegan. It's well worth a watch.
And it'll be on YouTube.
Should be on ITV4 or ITVX, one of those.
So I think a lot of people will be going back and watching some of his great moments at club and international level. We are still coming to terms that he's died aged 75. It was only 7 weeks ago he revealed he had stage 4 cancer, and he sensed that the end was near from his point of view. But it still is a terrible shock, despite the fact that he had gone public with that. The boys on Drive, I'm sure, will be paying further tribute with their guests after 4 o'clock. Before that, talkSPORT's Charlie Pritchard looks back on his life and career.
Born in Doncaster on the 14th of February 1951, Kevin Keegan almost immediately fell into football. Age 17, he made his debut for Scunthorpe United, and despite playing in the 4th division, he was courting interest from the top flight straight away. Bill Shankly came calling, and he bade Scunthorpe goodbye for the dizzy heights of Anfield.
My manager, Ron Ashman from Scunthorpe, drove me over to Pennines. I think it took about 4 hours from Scunthorpe to Liverpool in those days. And I met the great man. I was sat on a dustbin outside the development office because the main stand was being built. And he just come in and said, "Hey son, welcome to Liverpool."
At Liverpool, Keegan won 3 league titles, 2 UEFA Cups, 1 FA Cup and the European Cup. Then, after 323 appearances and 100 goals, Keegan left Liverpool in '77 to join Hamburg, where he became the highest paid player in Germany.
Counts beats his man well. There's the cross. Keegan! It's there! Not even Sepp Maier could stop that one!
The 5'8" sensation lit up the Bundesliga, earning the nickname Mighty Mouse, as he won the league title and back-to-back Ballon d'Ors. Before Keegan, only Alfredo Di Stefano, Franz Beckenbauer and Johan Cruyff had won the award 2 or more times. Here he is in 1979, speaking to ITV's Brian Moore at his home in Hamburg.
If ever I had the right to win it, it was to be this year. I played football up till Christmas that even I couldn't believe, And I mean, when you start surprising yourself, then, you start to worry. If I'd have got it last year when Simonson just pipped me, I wouldn't have felt right. I didn't feel I had a good season. I felt there was much better players in the Liverpool side alone, let alone Europe. And this year, I'm really chuffed because I feel that it's been my best season.
He wasn't just a club superstar. He was one of England's greatest too, captaining the Three Lions for 6 years until 1982, where he became the only England captain to win all 3 matches in a World Cup group stage. He ended his playing career in 1984 with Newcastle, a place he'd returned to as manager 8 years later. developing an almost godlike status among fans on Tyneside. Here's Alan Shearer.
He gave them hope, he gave them happiness, and he gave them a brilliant football team that played some great football. Very, very nearly won the Premier League, but it just wasn't to be. What a man, and he will always be loved.
That near miss came in the 95-96 season when, going up against Alex Ferguson, we got that now immortal "I would love it" rant. Years later, David Beckham revealed to Sky Sports it gave Manchester United a huge boost.
I love Kevin. I think he's a great manager, a really amazing person, but you could tell that he felt so strongly about what the manager had been doing. But we came into training and we knew that, you know, we'd won the league by then.
How did Keegan himself reflect on it? He once suggested the intensity of the title race was bound to spill out.
You have to look at it and say it was part of that season and the emotions of that season and a roller coaster ride. You know, the 4-3 at Liverpool, things like that you look back on and you think, wow, if only. But you know, you can't have if onlys in football.
At the turn of the century, Keegan would get his chance to lead England again, this time from the dugout. At Euro 2000, he led the Three Lions to a first win over Germany at a major tournament since the '66 World Cup final. But just 2 years later, after a shock defeat in World Cup qualifying, he resigned live on Sky Sports.
Please don't think anyone's put a gun to my head. In fact, far from it. It's been the opposite. But, you know, I've always been a man who knows when the time's right. I don't outstay my welcome. And I feel that's where I am now, you know.
From then on, Keegan dabbled in punditry, but in general kept himself away from the cameras. Kevin Keegan will forever be one of this country's greatest footballers. If an Englishman replicated his achievements today, 10-year-olds would have no need for Messi or Ronaldo shirts. It would be Keegan's name on their backs. His small frame carried one of the biggest personalities the game has ever seen, one that will be truly missed.
talkSPORT's Charlie Pritchard paying tribute to Kevin Keegan, who it's been announced in the last 45 minutes or so has died, age 75. The tributes will continue in Drive with Annie Goldstein and Ben Foster. I'm sure that'll include yours on the phone, emails, texts and tweets. We will see you tomorrow from 1 o'clock.